Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to welcome you to this distinguished alumni lecture in celebration of the 40th anniversary of the social sciences here at Rice. I'm Susan McIntosh, Interim Dean of Social Sciences, and I'm delighted to see you here for this event. I especially want to welcome alumni who have traveled to campus to share this event with us. And I'd like to make particular note of our Social Sciences Advisory Board members who are here. These are alums who generously share their time and money with Rice and who have played a very significant role in making Craft Hall a reality. Would board members stand or wave so that we can see you and acknowledge you? And at the end of the lecture, I'll mention the most recent giving opportunity that they unanimously voted just this morning to support. But right now, it is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce our speaker, David Rhodes, who flew in today from Los Angeles, where he is currently an advisor to the Los Angeles Times on their studios at LA Times Media Strategy. And with Super Tuesday just around the corner, he has a lot on his plate. So we are tremendously grateful that he has graciously accepted our invitation to speak today. David Rhodes is, of course, an alumnus. He earned his BA in Economics and Political Science in 1996. He was a member of Will Rice College, worked on the Thresher. There are greater things to come after you work on the Thresher. Here is the proof. And he served as an officer in the SA. He has been a member of the Rice University Board of Trustees since 2015. Mr. Rhodes was president of CBS News from 2011 to 2019, where he was responsible for overseeing CBS News content across all platforms: broadcast television, digital live streaming, Visive on Demand, CBSNews.com, and radio, including the award-winning program CBS Evening News, CBS This Morning, Face the Nation, and 48 Hours. I hope that means you know John Dickerson. He's one of my favorites. Okay. He joined CBS from Bloomberg LP, where he was head of their U.S. television group from 2008 to 2011, and he led the rebranding of the company's video journalism. David Rhodes began his career as a production assistant at Fox News Channel in 1996, shortly before it launched. During his tenure at Fox News, he was elevated to vice president of news, and his duties included leading the foreign desk, covering presidential elections, here you are again, overseeing global logistics, and making all Fox News field assignments. David Rhodes received the Radio Television Digital News Foundation's First Amendment Award in 2018. He was selected as a young global leader of the World Economic Forum in 2013 and served a term through 2018. We're delighted that he has chosen an incredibly timely subject for his talk today, the state of the news on television and its future. Please join me in welcoming David Rhodes to the podium.
All right, so as you heard there, you know, between Bloomberg and Fox and Davos and CBS, you know, I'm a member of every conspiracy theory in media. But good afternoon. It's great to be back on campus and celebrating the new Craft Hall of Social Sciences. And I just, you know, I mean, I remember all the social sciences programs being tucked into a corner of Sewell Hall here. And so this is a really remarkable facility here. I want to thank the Alumni Association for recommending me for this occasion, and Dean McIntosh and her team for organizing this event, and my fellow board member, Patty Kraft, for her commitment to this program through this building. As you heard, I'm Will Rice, class of 1996. I love my work as a trustee here with Chairman Bobby Tudor and President David Lebron. This has always been an incredible university in a dynamic city, but Rice has navigated these times as well as any peer institution, and that's really proof of Bobby and David's leadership. I am a New Yorker, But I came from LA this morning where I showered. Because they for a limited time, they still have water in California. But I am helping to build a studio business around the Los Angeles Times, which is under new ownership of Patrick Soon-Shiong and the editing of Norman Pearlstein, and really is the most important news organization on the West Coast. The business future of newspapers is increasingly in what I do, in television, streaming video, series development, podcasting, and live events. My wife, Emma, is in this field as well with the Time and Fortune conference business, which is where she is today, working on that business. After this evening's festivities, I am going back to LA to work on all those opportunities around the Super Tuesday coverage. Golden State holds its primary on the same day that you do in Texas next week. That's about as energetic and optimistic as I'm going to be today, because I came to talk about the future of news, including on television. I was an economics and political science major here, and this lecture is going to be as much economics as political science, because I'll make the argument that the incentive structure of news media has as much, if not much more, to do with journalistic outcomes as our fractured politics do. Did journalism fracture our politics, or did politics break our journalism? How can we get better results than the ones we see today? I'll try to answer those questions, and then I'll answer your questions, which will probably be more fun. So, you may or may not recognize Thomas Jerome Newton, seen here dying drunk in his chair before a wall of television monitors with a landline phone by his side. Do you remember landline phones? You'd pick them up. My 11-year-old picked one up 2 years ago, and he said, "Mommy, it's making a noise." Dial tone, new to him. But this is from 1976, and Newton isn't real. He was the humanoid played by David Bowie in the cult classic, The Man Who Fell to Earth. I've put this at the top of my remarks today because at some point recently, you've probably all felt like Tommy. He came to this planet trying to do the right thing, and he ended up choking on his news media diet and wondering if it might kill all civic life, or if maybe it was technology's fault. Whether online or on television, we've all indulged in a steady stream at some point of self-affirming commentary, only to complain bitterly about it later. People hate on the media. Which one? And what can you do about it? You could send some mean tweets. That'd show them. I've been swimming in this pool since I started out running the teleprompter at Fox, and I'm not very good at that, as you can tell, in the mid-'90s. And so for me, it's personal. But for you, it should be too, because we really need our news culture to work out. The structure of our business hasn't quite worked out for newspapers like the one where I work today. A lot has been written and analyzed about the pain in the newspaper industry, and there are lessons there for journalism. Print was hit hard when Facebook and Google institutionalized ad revenue disruption, and in the aftermath, while a handful of important outlets are making a really robust recovery, many more have been left for dead. Technology platforms have made token contributions to this rebuilding, but the hurricane of technological change that came for the newspaper business in the last 10 years has only gained in ferocity, and it's coming now for the mainland of news media revenues, which is video. Now, why is video so important? As a mass medium, video outperforms all other forms of news delivery. Text is preferable for certain categories. It's better for financial information, which is particularly important today. Audio wins when you're driving, and it's growing rapidly outside the car because AirPods, other hardware have made it easy to consume podcasts and all forms of audio in what's left of your interstitial time. But for general interest information, when video is available, video wins. And some of that's just human nature. Watching is easy. Contemporary history has unfolded before us in moving pictures. From the Kennedy assassination to 9/11, pictures were mostly revealed to us through linear television. But today, fewer people each year are getting this coverage in the traditional way, and fewer still will see news on television in the future, and there's no going back. Which does not necessarily mean we're headed for a zombie apocalypse, but here's how we got here. It wasn't that bad. This 767 crashed just off a beach in the Comoros Islands. 50 survived, 125 did not. It was November 1996, and this Ethiopian Airlines jet had been en route from Addis Ababa to Nairobi when hijackers ordered it to Australia. Now, not having nearly enough fuel to cross the Indian Ocean, ET-961 ended its journey in the Indian Ocean, and the incident was so close to the beach that one international tourist was able to capture the crash on film and record it for posterity because he happened to have a camera. There was a struggling news agency called WTN, which prolonged its life partly by its brokerage of this film, which was the only authoritative account of what happened in ET-961's last moments. Every international broadcaster had to have this coverage. But think of it today. Something happens, and there's just one piece of tape showing the event. That'd be impossible. For most of the history of television news, its core commodity, news video, was a scarce resource, just as it was on that day. Pictures were expensive to create. They were expensive to transmit. Newsworthy video was more likely to be shot by a professional than by all of us. A Sony Betacam recorder, which could play back tape in the viewfinder, was the height of technological sophistication at a time when walkie-talkies passed for mobile telephony. The infrastructure of global television was organized around the preciousness of this resource, making news video, moving it, brokering it. State broadcasters like the BBC, NHK, ZDF, or our commercially supported ABC, CBS, NBC, cable, satellite, CNN, Al Jazeera, all of these made reputations based on the gathering of scarce pictures. Across the road from here, there's a piece of the Berlin Wall outside Secretary Baker's office. NBC Nightly News cemented Tom Brokaw's position on TV and in the culture by being the first in position for the fall of the wall. CBS confronted Chinese officials on camera about the Tiananmen Square catastrophe. CNN famously transmitted night vision from Baghdad. For a time, no one could compete with these established networks on pictures. So as audiences, we could not avoid going to them when we needed to know. As difficult as this is, I show this picture because it's strangely easier to look at than another infinitely more tragic hijacking, the first impact of a plane with the North Tower of the World Trade Center on 9/11. I worked in a Manhattan newsroom on that day, and that first impact was captured again by just one film crew, which was on the street for a different purpose. And that account didn't immediately emerge. 9/11 is a fairly recent event. The National 9/11 Memorial and Museum reminds us that just about anyone under the age of 23 has no personal recollection of that event. But in less than one generation, the infrastructure that was created to cover such stories became mostly obsolete. Now, Billions of devices globally generate video at far higher quality than what the pros recorded at historic events. We transmit video to each other and around the world at low or no cost in almost real time. You often know what's going on before a news organization tells you their version, and ideologically, you are less available to receive an account of events that diverges from what you believe. The velocity of everything is accelerating geometrically, and scarcity is over. Which is not to say that the news media were ever all and only about saving the world and doing good coverage. Now, CNN rose to primacy in that era that included the Comoros crash, partly because it was better organized to deliver for audiences in a scarcity situation. Turner invested in news gathering infrastructure that later would look obsolete, but which was state-of-the-art in its day, and it was an infrastructure that never made business sense apart from the non-economic designs of its founder, Ted Turner. But even then, like all news brands, CNN was a mix of mission with audience strategy. Now, the mission may have been live from Baghdad, the value proposition that CNN would be in places no one else was, but the audience strategy was largely built on the O.J. Simpson trial. The first time that Americans were conditioned to watch cable news day after day for the latest on an ongoing story. Pointing a camera at Judge Lance Ito was not a mission exercise, it was an audience strategy. Fox News gave CNN competition on both mission and audience strategy. The mission was clear from the start: deliver a channel for the millions who didn't like or didn't trust the politics of CNN and network news. Fox was resource light, which later would become an incredible business advantage when these technological changes arrived. But on stories like the Florida recount, the mission came into its own. And the audience strategy, the May 2005 disappearance of Natalie Holloway was Fox's OJ. It was a daily drama, not likely to win any journalism school awards, but one that guaranteed a loyal, repeat audience just as the industry was approaching peak cable. The Holloway disappearance wasn't the most important thing that happened in our century's first decade, but it sure looked like it for the entire summer before Hurricane Katrina hit. There's a mismatch between what many news media were built to do and the environment of several billion smartphones connected to social media. All those networks that were built up to manage information scarcity still exist. It's billions in fixed costs, annual turnover, thousands of people around the world working for established institutions. That attracts attention, and attention, unlike video, is still a scarce resource. These dynamics don't just go away because that attention's diverted by your Instagram feed. And while Warren Buffett said that most newspapers are toast, he rode that horse for a while on the theory that there was an economic moat around newspapers. So what barriers to entry are left for news media? I'm auditioning for an economics department job here. I've already used barriers to entry, moats. All right, the biggest moat, perhaps not shockingly, is Washington and commentary related to Washington. America happens to hate Washington, which complicates audience strategy, but one of the last places where gathering information is in a cartel of some type, another good economics term, is our deeply complex federal government. Its official proceedings, its spectacles. A White House pool exists just to capture video of the president's activities, and that pool has the same members today that it had the year I graduated Rice. They still haven't got the memo. The last big change to the White House pool was letting CNN and then Fox in, CNN after Turner sued, and Fox after they hired a lot of people from ABC. The Trump-era dispute about whether the White House should hold a daily televised briefing is the classic conflict of this archaic system. Washington being the rare geography where television retains institutional advantages that are all beyond its societal significance. TV networks have an unfair advantage in the White House briefing room. They get good reserved seats in the front row with plaques on them. They get the best camera angles. What the Trump administration figured out is that if you can't break these institutional advantages, you can just not hold a briefing at all. Essentially a dispute about the distribution of hopelessly politicized information through established channels, the briefing room controversy is as much about the moat around established news media as it is a constitutional one. And journalism Twitter is not going to like that I feel that way, but that's actually what I think. But does it matter? Because all that institutional access helps feed an endless loop of shows offering political commentary on the day's events for the benefit of partisans everywhere. Competitive opinion taking the place of competitive coverage to meet today's massive market demand. And no judgments here. I mean, you've seen the shows. Sometimes you like them. Or you were flipping around. That's my favorite thing people say when they don't really want you to know they're a fan of the show. Well, I was flipping around. And then I stayed for 90 minutes. And I hated myself. Then there's the second, slightly less entrenched advantage, which is the rollout. Now, some forms of information, music, fashion, have migrated almost entirely to social media, but not every category of information is followed, at least not yet. As long as conventional news media enjoy viewer attention even at diminished scale, agenda-driven actors are going to bring us stuff. An extraordinary tonnage of what looks like news in our culture is actually an endless stream of this stuff. I could use another word, but stuff. Commercial projects that are promoted through the news media. Someone has a new book out, they've got a film, they've expressed themselves, maybe unchallenged, and now secondarily they're being covered for what they said or did in this expression, however numbingly predictable or extraordinarily self-serving that may be. You'll even hear it said occasionally that a reporter obtained a new book exclusively, or they're promoting their work here for the first time. But so what? I mean, it's still coverage of the coverage. Even the timing of these bits of news has an orderly hierarchy to it, with publicists moving the lesser reveals to less desirable holiday periods and reserving the better news for better positions on the calendar in which to capture your attention. Virtually every day of the year falls somewhere into this cadence. So it's the Golden Globes, it's CES, it's BCS, it's Sundance, it's Davos, it's State of the Union, and that's just January. So you better call your agent because all the good rollouts are probably taken. Coming up on 5 years ago, the editor of Vanity Fair defended that. He said, all stories are part of some coordinated rollout, all stories everywhere. Now, that time it was justifying the careful reveal of Caitlyn Jenner's transition through established rent-seeking channels. But if you can control when information is revealed, you can charge for that information. So with just those two thin reeds of a barrier to entry, hours of news on television are turned over to what's known in the trade as making TV. This is mostly useless and increasingly ubiquitous. You've heard about something, you got a push alert, you've searched, you've been served a link, and now you have an expectation of seeing something that looks like television coverage and confirms what you've heard. TV has a lot of resources left over from that era of picture scarcity, and so these are used to make TV. You take your classic weather story. You already know that there's a storm or that it's hot, and you get the weather on your phone, but a broadcaster dutifully sends someone out into that weather to show you what it's like. And that could be the local weather outside your window. It could be catastrophic events elsewhere. Chances are you are aware of it, and you could receive the basic information in some other way. And sometimes we do have the capacity to do good journalism while making TV, like the reporting of government ineptitude was the narrative after certain hurricanes. But more often, let's be honest, we're wearing hip waders where none are necessary. Still, volumes of audience research suggest you're more likely to watch if someone is giving you this report from a snowbank or on a beach in the wind. And so this TV is made for you to watch. That rent-seeking, so much of what you see on social media isn't dissimilar from the old means of audience research. Programmers know what will get you to respond, and so they show it to you. Making TV, though, will be the first thing to go when the economics catch up to this medium. If we're not telling the audience something they didn't already know, then why are you going to pay us with your time and attention? So first, let's talk about that audience. Remember Children of Men? All right, in the film, it's been years since anyone new has arrived on Earth. Society has degraded into managing decline. The ad breaks are reserved for drug makers, euthanasia tablets, and when a baby does come along, everybody but Clive Owen tries to make a killing. So it's kind of like the cable business today. Because since about 2007, 0 new cable households have been born. No net households have signed up. No new subscribers for these shows. By contrast, if you were working in cable until 2007, you could count on more people coming into the ecosystem each year. Just showing up with a signal and a carriage commitment, you could expand your audience. In this era, CNN was joined by Court TV, CNBC, Fox, MSNBC, more channels of importance. People called 1-800-OK-CABLE, actually called and spoke with someone on the phone, got hooked up, and until one day, like the playground in Children of Men, they just stopped being any new children. By that time, cable had become to news what newspapers had been in their prime, the most profitable corner of the business, returning 40, 50, and in the case of Fox News in certain years, as much as 65% margins to investors. 2007, it's important to remember, wasn't just peak cable households. It was the end of Bear Stearns, the eve of the financial crisis. When the Great Recession hit, investors came to prize subscription revenue much more highly than anything tied to advertising, because no one wants exposure to ad revenue when they can remember a time that whole categories of ads just went away. So the result, faced with no new customers coming into the store, plus a preference for repeat customers who will pay increasing subscription fees, since not all revenues are created equal, programmers must put audience passion ahead of audience size. Late model cable news programming is not designed to get more people into the tent. It's designed to keep in the tent people who would change the channel, would cancel subscriptions if their favorite news commentators weren't there. And so we've got our current politics on media. If a viewer watches one night a week, can we get them to watch 3? 3 nights a week, can they watch 5? If they watch an hour a night, can we get them to watch 2? The viewers that count economically in this ecosystem are the ones that can't imagine not having this channel, not the occasional viewer who come in because something happened and they want to see us make TV. It's no secret that just about everyone in this category is old. That's not pejorative, it's just true. The news demo on which advertising inventory has generally been sold is adults 25 to 54. Most of the audience of cable news, not just a lot of the audience, but the majority, is 55 plus, actually 65 plus, with the 55 side of that being quite young. Not only are no new babies being born, just about everyone watching is too old to have babies. And just, if you don't believe me, look at the ad breaks. It's a stroll through Walgreens, okay? The only way out of that dynamic is to get to a place where you can actually attract new eyeballs. Like mother and child have to survive the rowboat ride at the end of Children of Men. So can't we do that as an industry, shouldn't we? Only 2 news categories show explosive growth in recent months: podcasts and newsletters. Neither is big enough to take the ad dollars or the cultural importance of video, and so news videos must be completely adapted to bring in new people as opposed to just super serving the old ones. And currently no one faces the needed incentives to do that. So the more sources, the better, right? Even when pictures were scarce, there was plenty of skepticism to go around about the biggest stories of our times. But when we have fewer accounts of what happened, generally there is greater consensus about the underlying events. More than regulatory failure or confirmation bias or just plain prejudice, what really depresses trust is availability. When there are many versions of events, each of us is more available to just choose our own reality. And if you don't believe me, just go home for Thanksgiving and you will know what I mean. Like a science experiment without a control, explosive growth in the availability of data has introduced too many variables for any one account to be truly authoritative, even if it's true. We've moved along a vector from low information, high trust, to high information and low trust. When nothing is authoritative, everything is biased, and when everything is biased, everyone else's bias is the problem. The Knight Foundation spent considerable time and resources examining the dialogue on Twitter so that we didn't have to, and found, surprise, it's pretty much opinionated people shouting at one another. Not enough center-right voices in relation to the population, and a general storm of center-left versus far-right outliers. And that's just one platform, according to one unbiased observer. In this environment, media, and social media in particular, have in recent years led a march to the bottom of a highly regarded annual trust barometer from Edelman, the public relations firm. Released each January, the Edelman report shows news media in the ranks of public esteem that were reserved for bankers in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis. So it's like, just as financiers were blamed for the crash of the economy, media are now blamed for the crash of truth. I led CBS News for most of the last decade, where we tried to program and market legacy broadcast as centrist truth. But the public doesn't see it that way. If you unpack those legacies, there's a lot for partisans to dislike. When the audience has already had 5 push alerts before you even get to program to them, people really do choose their own truth, and that's where distrust metastasizes. That Edelman Trust Barometer out just last month says 58% believe that the media they see are contaminated by untrustworthy information, and strong majorities of the audience are concerned about fakes and frauds. Analysis, commentary, insight, opinions, each version of events seems to pack the same authority when it's juxtaposed with an endless stream of opinions. Not that a time of fewer sources is something we should look back on with wonder and longing. because constrained by technology and regulation, legacy news media in this country didn't have such a great track record as we'd like to think. Newspapers led us into wars of convenience, Hearst, 1898, or promoted the personal investments of ownership, the Chandlers with the paper I now work for. Reporters covered for politicians that they liked, like JFK's personal life. They were latecomers to facts that went against a government narrative. Vietnam was not going well long before Cronkite said it wasn't going well. Everything was subject to professional bias, and let's be honest, everything was a lot whiter and a lot more male than the country as a whole. In the Trump era, news media leadership have been on the defensive, endlessly explaining the circumstances when a report comes along that seems to confirm suspicions of these professional biases. And it's an axiom in politics that when you're explaining, you're losing. As much as people are concerned that journalistic truth might be a left-right issue, the sins of the past combined with the confusion and velocity of the present have combined to support a more troubling conclusion. In its own study of trust in America, the Pew Research Center finds that these trends conspire to lead a strong majority to conclude that people are just out for themselves, the people making this coverage. And if you worked in media, the polls might be right. If you unpack political polling in recent years and you put it together with anecdotal reporting, you'll hear a popular lament that no one is listening to me. That's the general flavor that I remember from several election nights worth of exit polling, people wanting to be heard and feeling like they couldn't be. The irony of today's trust environment is that even as social media created infinitely more ways to be heard, more and more people feel that no one is listening to them. And some of the resentment of media comes from precisely this place. If you're doing your job in news, you're doing the one thing that many people think is being denied to them, you're being heard. So in this environment, there's a bull market and blame storming about the state of news media today. Blame storming, I mean, before we innovate and try to solve these problems, let's figure out whose fault this is. Very chaotic situation. This is a BBC News snapshot of a moment in the long-running Syrian crisis when ISIS was relatively strong and the political picture in that country was at maximum disorder. No bold front lines, straight arrows, and in their place what looks like someone spilled 5 drinks on the carpet. The situation there never stops deteriorating. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost, many more disrupted. In the information business, bad actors benefit when the lines are not easily drawn. So Bashar al-Assad has made the most of an asymmetric information environment. No one really knows what's going on. We check in on it in U.S. news media sometimes. There's relatively less coverage of Syria by contrast with past conflicts of similar strategic magnitude or human suffering. And so the conflict's main beneficiary has been the one with the most to lose and the least morality, and that's Assad. This trend presents in many areas, not just Mortal Kombat or the Mideast. Cyber warfare, massive data breaches, weaponized machine learning, hacked elections. Bad actors generally prefer chaos over consensus. So information failure is a main goal of bad actors. Consensus and control are not always good. China certainly prefers consensus to chaos, but is just plain bad for journalism, does not accept the role of the Western press, and in its lack of transparency in the coronavirus epidemic shows the lengths to which they will go to conceal bad facts. Bad actors and dead-enders capitalize when information clarity is low. The great media proprietors always derived more political influence than they lost from speaking truth to power. And the next great media leaders will do the same. Or not. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising that in this environment, important players like Amazon and Netflix look at this state of play and decide they'll pass. In many ways, not offending the sensibilities, for instance, of foreign governments is an important reason why. Netflix, for instance, has made concessions to stay on the right side of Turkey's autocratic leader because they sell subscriptions there. Turkey detains more journalists than any other regime, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ. The most powerful platforms in our world have the most tortured relationship with news content. But in a way, who can blame them for sitting this out? In entertainment or in sports, you get to go to a show. There's a red carpet. Meek Mill might be there. The people are interesting. Your kids want to meet them. There might even be free drinks. Amazon has been drawn to both sports and entertainment. And Bezos has made important investments in news, but he's reserved those for his personal holdings with his purchase of the Washington Post. So to extend the geopolitical analogies, choosing to get into news is, by contrast with sports and entertainment, a bit like crossing the Khyber Pass of media. There's nothing wrong with sports and entertainment. There's brilliant and compelling figures in it. And then there's this. This speech that I'm giving is adapted from a presentation I made at a getaway with the media investment bank, Allen & Company. And in the presentation, I wanted investors to consider the risks to firms of entering into news decisions, of jumping off of that entertainment and sports slide. And they're considerable. So I showed this picture of the legendary mountain pass that's at the center of so many conflicts. And this quote is from Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King. You'll be cut to pieces before you're 50 miles across the border. You'll have to travel through Afghanistan to get to that country. It's one mass of mountains and peaks and glaciers, and no Englishman has been through it. The people are utter brutes, and even if you reach them, you couldn't do anything. That sounds a lot like the news business, speaking as someone who's been living it for a long time. And if you happen to read the classic book and remember how it ends, anybody? The narrator's right. The two travelers return to India at the end, and one is carrying the severed head of the other in a horsehair bag. It ends badly. Netflix openly says they're not in the truth to power business. In fact, Reed Hastings, their CEO, ostentatiously said that on stage to New York Times Steelbook correspondent Andrew Ross Sorkin. We're not in the truth to power business, we're in the entertainment business. Now, how many people in entertainment over the generations have thought of themselves at least occasionally speaking truth to power? Hasn't some of the greatest work in film, television, music done exactly that? Including plenty of projects promoting social change on Netflix itself. As much as we might lament our political leadership, as a media industry, we're not doing ourselves any favors when we energetically reject any responsibility to speak truth to power. So that's a lot of how do we get here? Where are we? So where are we going? The first thing I'd say is that innovation will come from desperation. Don't expect wholesale changes from established news media brands. If you were facing the incentives they face, you'd optimize, not revolutionize. The ride or die scenario in this belongs to the relative losers from the current economics. These are journalism enterprises that have high fixed costs, that aren't easy to cut back, and they're paired with low returns from diminishing revenue streams. So like Chris Christopherson wrote, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. if you're sitting on a unionized newsroom and you're not getting 40% cable sub fee margins or state license fee support, at least you've got your freedom. Someone on the knife edge of these media economics is going to find an innovative way to get attention for their news report. And they have no choice if they want to continue to do that and to preserve terminal value. Second, the incumbent winners, cable news, television platforms, are going to seek a new bargain with technology. No one in Silicon Valley would listen to this speech and decide to get into the news business after years of fighting to stay out of it. But only 29% of Americans in that same Edelman survey trust news that they see on social media platforms, and the regulators are saddling up. So over time, the incentives offered by tech have got to give advantage to credible information and actual journalism. News programmers are restricted in how closely we can coordinate to seek better terms for our content, whether it's more favorable revenue sharing, actual subscription fees. But like an arms race, the only way to get to terms is to build offensive weapons in hopes that a settlement can be reached before you have to use them. That means the most important news content must be moved to the new streaming tier of our media ecosystem. Your own media consumption has or will be defined by cord cutting, broadband, wireless, and new-ish services like YouTube TV, Hulu, HBO Max, Peacock, not to mention Amazon and Netflix. Primary resources have got to be relocated to the digital platforms of the major companies, sometimes at the expense of the legacy presentation, and I say that as somebody who's made a career in the legacy presentation. Stories have to be broken. Video and audio talent need to appear exclusively. News needs to be presented in direct-to-consumer digital first. The winners of the current system are going to be existentially threatened unless they move content away from the most vulnerable revenue streams, and otherwise somebody from that ride or die camp is going to come along to take their place. In a way, this looks like the music business. When it was desperate for revenue, artists built incrementally better economics around touring, but the industry only returned to health through a negotiated settlement that was pooled royalties, license fee structures, digital streaming. Everyone wins, maybe not as much as everyone would like to win, and maybe not in the way that they did 20 years ago. But for now, in music, favorable economics have been restored. IP is rewarded, user experience improves. And so it's as if Tommy sobered up and flew home with, a case of bottled water for his dying planet. That's the music business. The biggest transformation in media today is Disney's decision to consolidate content within a direct-to-consumer digital strategy called Disney+. You can argue this was a defensive move that was driven by Amazon and Netflix, but it's still transformative. The move saw really storied entertainment franchises change hands. It shifted important new content like The Mandalorian to a shiny new distribution channel. And so why hasn't anyone moved news? Too many entrenched constituencies, distributor relationships, affiliations, fee structures, inertia, inattention, muscle memory. These have kept the best journalism in economically vulnerable places like ad-supported television and print magazines. Someone will get smart. Someone will shock media by doing what Disney Plus is doing for entertainment. Maybe you will. Is counterinsurgency easier than insurgency? You can only find out by doing it or by failing to do it. So thank you again, and let me answer your questions. Right over here.
What's driving the move of hedge funds and other big investors to acquiring newspapers?
Because it's bad. Not the hedge funds' involvement themselves, but there's a calculation that you can ride down these economics and that there are still some cash flows left. What there aren't are new pools of venture or public capital coming in to build up those businesses because they don't see a path forward. And that's when the PE guys come in. All the way in the back. Any future for? Well, I hope so, because I just started a job in print media. I actually think there is, and that's what I mean by this ride or die scenario at the end. I mean, great innovation comes from great disruption. The big print franchises that have made it through this, some of them are finding a real economic future. Print newspaper circulation peaked in this country in about 1990, but print advertising revenue didn't fall off until after 2005. There was a long period where a lot of people in the industry were like, oh, everything's fine. Everything's fine. But it wasn't. And TV is about 13 years through that 15-year cycle of thinking everything's fine. If you own a newspaper and you've survived this long, you may make it through. But if you make it through, it's not going to be by printing relatively more papers. It's going to be by taking that journalism and distributing it in every different way. It's going to be by being a media company that puts out a newspaper, not a newspaper company that does media. Yeah.
Given that business costs for years, do you think this will create more of a polarized public in a sense that they actually have to pay money or to watch CNN or Fox News? But if that money creates more content that just do you think this will be more polarized?
The difference is because the New York Times gets criticized sometimes for becoming a different flavor of news organization for that it's become a subscription product. That when it was ad-supported, it was different. First, I just disagree with that. I've been reading the New York Times since I don't remember, and it's always been a left-leaning newspaper. I don't think that's like a new development, nor do I think it's particularly shocking to people who read it. I think they think it's good. The difference is if you're in a subscription fee product where the number of subscriptions isn't growing, then you will super serve an audience, and then the content will become relatively more what it is over time. But if you're in a subscription fee environment where the pie is growing and there's an opportunity as a programmer to bring more people into the tent, then it'll be less polarizing. That's my basic thesis. Yeah.
Thanks. The talk, you covered a lot of ground really well, really quickly. I grew up in Southern California, and my brother still lives there, and I'm embarrassed to say that he listens to Rush Limbaugh all the time and loves his show. And so we were talking about something. I said, why don't you read the LA Times? And he said, I don't want to read that paper. It's just become too liberal. And, could you go back to, you alluded to this fact, do you think that, that the population, the readership is driving what the paper decides to write on, or does the paper then affect what the population thinks?
The LA Times over-indexes on the west side of LA and in the peripheral suburbs. It is a relatively more Anglo readership than the market it serves, which I think is a problem and also an opportunity. It misses certain categories of the audience. First, there are very important diaspora populations in Southern California with which the legacy Times is never effectively connected. There may even be opportunities for local language products. There are more than 100,000 homes in Southern California that speak each of 7 languages: Armenian, Tagalog, Spanish, certainly, Korean, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and Farsi. So if you could figure out a way to provide a range of products that provided some intergenerational connection to the paper's news report in local language and not, you might have a better chance of connecting with those populations. The other population in which it under-indexes, which is quite Anglo, is actually left-leaning, and it's the so-called hipster crescent of LA. So if you're familiar with LA, Atwater Village, Echo Park, Silver Lake, Eagle Rock, these are places where public radio, podcasting, newsletters are making inroads, and the paper's not as competitive as it needs to be. But go back to how we began this, talking about the West Side and some of those suburbs. Sometimes people's reading of a news report is based on what it puts out. And certainly the editorial page of the paper is unabashedly left-leaning. But sometimes it's also who reads the paper. So your family may not like people from Santa Monica, generally speaking, and people from Santa Monica probably subscribe to the Times. And so there's like a transitive property that goes on there. And I think that's a lot of that. Sorry for all the Southern California demographics, but I've been looking for somebody to talk to about it. Yeah.
So I think if you're, so first of all, thank you for really a thought-provoking lecture this afternoon.
Thanks.
One of the points that you hit on that was crucial is this issue about high information, low trust. And part of the problem is that nobody has the time to go vet 17 different sources. That used to be the journalist's job. So I'm wondering, what can news media do to rebuild the public trust, even when they are delivering news that they perhaps don't want to hear or may not agree with to the public?
The real difficulty of it is that you can't be error-free. And it's also why, as much as I might lament some of the incremental decision-making of those technology firms and the personalities involved in them, I don't think they're making the wrong decision. News is risky, it's accident-prone, there's like a scandal every few months, and it's just not for everybody for those reasons. And it's not for investors for those reasons most of the time. Again, the great proprietors, but also the great journalists of this business have seen a greater benefit to challenging convention and doing challenging coverage than they've seen a loss of, frankly, friends and economics to doing so. But you do have to be willing to confront people and sometimes alienate them and get in trouble and manage accidents. There's not a lot of enterprises that are willing to do that. They generally sit within controlled companies. I don't think the state is a good place to do it. I mean, ask people who work at the BBC, it's hard, and it's not necessarily a replacement. So the short answer, though, that's the long one, is that if you get it right, there are enormous returns to doing that. Like the great investigative reports that have blown something open have, generally speaking, solidified audience for years to come. And some companies do see a path there.
Sort of full rollout of 5G means to any and all of this?
I think there's a risk of 5G being overbought. I think people hope it'll solve every problem, and I think that's unlikely. Because some of what we're talking about today is human nature. We're talking about confirmation biases, prejudices, choosing your own facts. And so, if the towers are smaller and faster, it solves some problems, but not all.
So I was wondering, you talking a lot during the presentation about how, especially with the Disney Plus idea, that would be a lot of media consolidation and more of like a more centralized view of journalism. But you also mentioned that with the communities of Southern California, how having just the LA Times doesn't fit all the communities. So I was wondering, for potential solutions to that, would you lean toward a more centralized media where it's a few big companies trying to reach everyone they can, or more decentralized where each of those different communities has their own independent media?
Right now, we got a mix of both, and neither really works perfectly. So they only really work in concert. You usually have smaller, specialized operations, and then sort of larger, more mechanized bureaucracies. The thing about it is, even in this kind of broken trust environment, people, even in ideological camps, tend to seek out the approval and almost validation of the big, lumbering, bureaucratic operation. But I think the short answer is I think you need both.
What was about the bankruptcy of McClatchy and smaller newspapers, and for example, like the Miami Herald, which did groundbreaking investigative reporting into Jeffrey Epstein that we might not have known about had there not been a Miami Herald.
Look, newspapers could have seen it coming. I mean, people were buying newspapers for the coupons. Who's circled an ad in the real estate section to go look at an apartment or found a job there lately or bought a car? I mean, for a long time, newspapers had the margins that we now see in cable, 40 to 65%. And they were family controlled, generally speaking. And some of those families sort of saw what was coming, and they either innovated, like the Sulzbergers, with some financing, or they sold, like the Chandlers, for $5 billion, and they did, or the Bancrofts with the Journal. Others held on, and they weren't equipped. The McClatchy bankruptcy is really one about failing to get the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation to take over their obligations, and that's what will be resolved. The Miami Herald does amazing work. The people who work there, because of that, will find other places to do it. The real sadness if the McClatchy bankruptcy isn't resolved peacefully is in some of the smaller papers in markets where there's really no other journalism, like Modesto, where the Modesto Bee is important. Nobody's really going to go in there and find economic benefit in covering that market if they can't figure it out, so they sort of need to figure it out. I think that's the last question. Thanks so much. Fabulous building. Thanks, thanks, Patty Kraft. All right.
Thank you so very much, David. That was, I mean, thought-provoking is absolutely the way to describe your talk. Very thoughtful. And I, for one, understand a great deal better what I find on TV at night and why, when I toggle between MSNBC and CNN, I'm always seeing the same story. So, and it must be my demographic. My brother, who is older than I, has the same problem. In any event, I want to thank you all for coming, and we now have a reception outside, and you can find on the tables, if you are interested in celebrating our 40th anniversary by giving a small gift to Rice, our Access and Opportunity Fund, which is what our Social Science Advisory Board approved this morning. It is a fund that allows the Dean's Office to help students who are on financial aid be able to participate in the full range of opportunities for course-related travel and course fees. This is a need that is not covered anywhere else in the university, and so we are trying to make it possible for all students, regardless of their circumstances, to be able to take courses that provide these additional experiences, but which cost something extra. So that is our thought, and you'll find the cards on the table that explain it. So thank you again for coming. Thank you again, David Rhodes. Really, it was a wonderful way to celebrate our 40th anniversary.